Aang was left with a stunned expression on his face due to Lena's sudden appearance. He could only stare at her cakes, her back, as she appeared in front of our boy, saving him from Dylan's attack. But Aang was wondering if she had used a green core to forcefully regenerate her body into its peak form. Dylan, on the other hand, didn't feel worried about her sudden appearance. He even reminds Lena of how she wasn't even allowed to wear her battle uniforms ever again. Seeing her sudden appearance here, Dylan could only take it as a challenge to their king's decision. But our brave girl Lena was no longer the weak little girl from before. She firmly stands against Dylan, correcting him that she was only barred from participating in any programs that are related to hunting demons, and for the issue regarding the battle uniform. She was allowed to wear them, as they were her only clothes. If she was actually banned, wouldn't that mean she had to walk around naked? Seeing the way she talked back to Dylan, Aang could see how Lena was still Lena, being the straightforward and honest person he knew from before in the past. Aang knew her to be the most liveliest and the most straightforward out of the 6 talents. In his previous life, Aang was always the one standing in front of her. He never thought that this time, it would be her turn to do the same for him. Even the announcer was caught off guard by the fact that a member of the former 6 talents Lena Vil had made her sudden appearance on the battlefield. The announcer wonders if this was a part of some secret segment, and he couldn't believe the amount of surprises for this year's demon hunting competition. Dylan continues to tell Lena about how he respected her as a named warrior from the past, but he assures her that he wasn't going to give her any chance to save face. After all, Dylan sees Lena as a loose-lipped bitch. But Lena wasn't afraid of Dylan at all. Her face was filled with confidence as she knew that Dylan, being a part of the new 6 talents, couldn't get into conflicts right now since they were in front of a massive audience. She even tells him that Aang was a child of an acquaintance that she knew, and that he had tested him enough. But she knew deep down that there was something else behind the reason why Dylan wanted to test Aang. Hearing her sharp remarks, Dylan couldn't help but feel angry as a vein popped up on the side of his face. He starts to laugh to himself, telling Lena and Aang that they were a bunch of people that made him sick, before unleashing a new wave of green skill attack. The announcer was quick to analyze Dylan's sudden attack as the drill snake's command. This was an AoE skill that shoots multiple arrows out in a fan-shaped formation, a skill that the enemy can never dodge. Angered by the sudden attack from the shameless bastard, Lena herself charges her abilities up to counterattack. But before she could do anything, a shadow dashes past her. It was Aang, who managed to block the green arrow attacks with his broadsword. His sudden action causes Lena to be stunned as she sees the past Aang within the present Aang, after he had defended her from Dylan's attack. Even though he had managed to block the green arrows, more of them appeared from the sides, heading straight to Lena. This time, Lena grabs onto Aang's shoulder, telling him to get behind her, as it was her time to shine. Using her barrier as a weapon, Lena punches the crap out of the incoming arrow attacks. Even though he was protected, Aang felt a sudden rush of panic, as the reason why he came forward to block the attack was because he didn't want Lena to attack. Because he knew her so well, that with her personality, when Lena gets stubborn and fights, there will definitely be casualties. It turns out to be true as Lena charges straight towards Dylan without hesitation and with only murder in her eyes. The announcer in the broadcasting room was shocked to see this moment. He tells the crowd that there was a chance of seeing a fight between the new and former 6 talents, an event that was even rarer than that of a septuple-finned demon appearing. Dylan was excited by Lena's actions, telling her that he had to use all of his strength in order to fight against her. And so, the 2 members of the 6 talents rushed forward, facing off against one another, Dylan with his green spear, Lena with her fist of fury. But as they were moving closer to one another, Aang started to take a deep breath in as the announcer revealed to everyone that Dylan was using his ultimate technique, the demon-piercing gun, which shows that he was actually serious about this. "Thank you, great warrior Dylan," shouted Aang so loudly that it stopped both warriors in their tracks. Lena was baffled by Aang's sudden shout, turning around to face him with a blurred expression on her face. But our boy continues his shouting, thanking Dylan for teaching him so many battle skills and techniques. Aang started to smile, realizing that his plan was working. With a mighty shout once again, Aang thanks Dylan who, despite being so busy, had chosen to teach the younger generation like him some of his battle experience. From Paris in the waiting into the audience in the arena, everyone was completely confused and stunned by Aang's sudden shouting. He continues to shout, asking Dylan if he was satisfied with his performance now before ending with a smile on his face. The announcer catches what Aang was saying, telling the crowd about how the vanguard warrior from Pictia was expressing his gratitude towards Lord Dylan excitedly. Hearing this, the crowd had a mixed reaction towards what was happening. Some of them wanted the 2 septuple warriors to fight as it would be the highlight of the event, But some were worried, knowing that if two such powerful warriors were to fight, then a war might break out, so just seeing some of Lord Dylan's moves would be enough. Convincing the others, the crowd decided to just cheer on Dylan for his great performance. Leaving him stunned as he continues to hear the cheers from the crowd, about how he was spending his precious time to teach the younger generations. Closing his eyes, he realizes how clever Aang's plan was. With the way things are, Dylan wouldn't be able to attack anymore. Aang tells Dylan that as the next generation of warriors, he was sure to live up to his expectations, making sure to work hard on his skills. But in his mind, he was glad that his method of killing with flattery worked well with Dylan, since with so many people watching them right now, Dylan wouldn't be able to make another move. Lena on the other hand was upset, telling Aang that since her mood was ruined, she wasn't going to fight anymore. Dylan decided to stop the fight here as well, summoning his trusty microphone. He announces to the crowd that Aang had passed his so-called test, praising Aang as being a truly astounding young warrior. The announcer reveals to the crowd that Aang, the vanguard member of Pictia, had gained Dylan's recognition and congratulates Pictia's city for winning this year's competition. Hearing the announcement of this year's winner for the demon hunting competition, the crowd started to cheer loudly for Pictia. Back in their waiting room, the entire team was watching what was going on. They couldn't believe that they had won the competition without having to do anything at all. The announcer even declares that this is the fastest and the most surprising demon hunting competition that has ever taken place, a miracle created by the hands of the vanguard member named Aang. As Lena left the battlefield, she whispered something that only Aang could hear as she walked past him. The news of the city started to spread the news about Aang, calling his arrival as a surprising aid. The newscaster announced that Pictia City had managed to take down the trophy for this year's demon hunting competition with just their vanguard member alone. But one no was paying attention as they were busying throwing Aang high up into the air. With the massive golden trophy present in their room surrounded by flowers, Paris couldn't help herself, praising Aang for being brave and helping her city to win this year's competition. Looking at how excited she was, Aang couldn't reveal the fact that he was almost killed. Paris was definitely high this time as she grabbed our boy and pushed him into the heavenly mountains, telling Aang that he was free to do whatever he wanted to her, as tonight, it would be her treat. Lucky man, the Manhwa might end her as Aang suffocates in the heavenly mountains, while Paris team members begs her to let go of Aang and to calm down. After coming back to life, Aang calls out to Paris in a serious tone, asking her if she still remembers what she had promised him from before. She confidently tells him that she did, ensuring that with a pledge, Aang would be able to talk with the person in charge of managing the energy crystals. Aang was glad to hear that, but as he dusts off his cape, he realizes how dirty his clothes were, so he asks Paris if it was possible for him to get a set of regular clothes, and for the celebrations, he wouldn't be participating in it. Hearing that, a member of the team was curious if Aang was going on a date, with a guy or girl. Hearing that question, Aang couldn't help but smile, before revealing that he was meeting with an old acquaintance of his. The scene shifts to show Lena standing by herself on a cliff, overlooking the city. Aang arrives, dressed like a Korean drama male lead. As the sun begins to set, he announces his arrival to Lena, asking her what she needed since she told him to come here. As she turned around, Lena's face was filled with disbelief upon seeing that Aang had actually arrived. She recalled their past memory of how Aang revealed his anime to her, and that she had whispered to him to meet her at their secret base after she left the battlefield. Which made her question Aang about how he knew about this secret base. As she takes a few steps towards Aang, her voice starts to shake, with tears filling her eyes. She looks at our boy, asking him if he really was the Aang that she knew. We turn to a distant past memory, where Lena proudly shows off to Aang about this secret spot, and how they could see the entire city from here and that no one else has ever been here before. As she basked in the rays of sunlight, she was happy. Since it was just her and Aang present here, this was when she decided that this spot on this exact cliff was to be her secret base. Aang's reaction to her words was a flick to the forehead. Hearing her say that this was her secret, made him wonder if she was still a kid. But Lena was hella pissed at Aang for flicking her forehead again as it would make her stupid. She even shouts at Aang, telling him that everyone wants their own secret base and that he knows nothing, only about how to kill demons and nothing else. But looking at where they were, with the glorious sunrise, Aang admits that this place was serene. Turning around, Lena tells Aang to look as she summons her powers. Deciding that this place was their secret base, she craves their names onto a nearby boulder. Lena and Aang, we now return to the present, where that same boulder is now covered in dirt and moss, hiding parts of their names on it. Lena was still tearing up as she asked Aang if he remembers this spot, their secret base. Aang hesitated to answer her as he looked at her face. Lena turns around, apologizing for her sudden actions in the moment, and for scaring Aang. She explains to Aang that he felt very similar to someone close to her, a very dear friend. She continues to tell Aang that he had acted too recklessly in the competition, and that if she hadn't arrived in time, he might have lost his life, so with that, she wanted him to consider it as payment for his help from back at the statue. Making them equal now, but then Aang calls out to Lena, using the real version this time, surprising her as she turns around slowly, asking him about what he had just called her. With the same forehead flick, Aang repeats the very same words he said to her in the past at this exact spot. You're still going on about your secret base stuff? It's been so many years, and yet you're still a kid. Hearing this and seeing his past self, Lena finally cried and let out her tears. Aang was glad to see that she was still okay even after all these years. With a deep breath out, he reveals to Lena that he was back, the one she knew as a dear friend and the king of warriors, Aang. Wasting no time at all, she rushes in for a hug. As she held her face close to his chest, she started to cry even more, choking on her words. She asked Aang about why he was only returning back now, and about where he had been this entire time. Aang didn't reply at all, and only held Lena in his arms as she continued to cry and wail everything she has within her soul, letting out her frustrations that she held within after all these years. Lena finally learns that Aang had reincarnated from half a century ago, and that there was a octuple-finned demon in the steel of the ancient king, proving that the rank of septuple-finned demon wasn't the highest that they can reach. Aang tells her that it was hard for him to understand as well, since he couldn't figure out how it happened either. It seems absurd to him even though he was the one saying it, but if he could place it in simpler terms, then he meant that he had actually died half a century ago. And yet, here he was, reincarnated in the present day, with something weird inside of his body. But Lena didn't seem concerned about all that, she was just glad that Aang was still alive. Seeing her reaction, Aang decided to ask about something he didn't understand. Why was everyone in the city so hostile towards them, the old king and the former 6 talents now? He recalled that back in their time, they have fought with their lives for the sake of all humanity, so why would the people hate them now? Lena reveals that if there was a reason, it would be because of him. She explains that in the Battle of Dawn back then, Aang had led a squad of warriors to the steel of the ancient king, even though most of them strongly advised him not to enter the steel of the ancient king rashly. A representative of the logistics department and the warriors came to the front line to stop Aang. Since they were in a rare advantage, everyone wished to maintain the current balance. But the past Aang didn't listen to their explanations, and simply told everyone to wait for their return. With that, he led a group of warriors inside. After some time, the people received word that he had died in the steel of the ancient king. As news of his death was spread around, the warriors' momentum and confidence fell to rock bottom. The warrior everyone knew as the strongest had died, their king had left them behind, and because of that, despair spread throughout all of humankind. After Aang's death, the demonic wave launched a large-scale counterattack. The territory that humanity had reclaimed was now occupied and trampled on by the demons once again. The ground was covered with the corpses of their human warriors. At that time, someone calculated that 90% of humanity's warriors perished. Many people believe that all of this should not have happened. If Aang had listened to them back then, if only he didn't enter the steel of the ancient king so rashly, then maybe the number of survivors of the battle for Dawn would have been many times greater. After that, with the flow of time, the new 6 talents and new kings slowly appeared. These new people were also a part of the group that had opposed Aang's decision back then, which was why so many people hated Aang right now. The rest of Aang's 6 talents were cast aside by the people, as they were seen as his supporters. In the end, the new king had revoked their status as warriors. For the first time, Aang started to tremble as he realized what his past decision had done to the world and the amount of deaths he had caused. Lena assures him that she was fine after so many years, and because it was now in the past, who was right wasn't that important. She continues to tell Aang that when she passes by his statue, she would stop and gaze at it, recalling so many things. Seeing how he was alive in a strange manner now, Lena called it a miracle. But Aang was furious by the outcome of his decision. He explains that the reason he went into the steel of the ancient king was to end all of the demons, so that their future descendants would no longer have to deal with them. Everything he did it for humanity. With her hand on his face, Lena tells him that she understands, but reminded Aang that he couldn't blame the people, because as their king, it was natural for him to become the target of blame. Accepting her explanation, Aang turns to ask about what had happened to his 6 talents. Lena reveals that 3 of them had died after his death in a battle, only 3 including her remained. The yellow core 6 talent known as Anran of the Earth was heavily injured, and later resigned on their accord, going into seclusion in a city somewhere. As she gazes back to the city, Lena tells Aang that she had planned on leaving this place but it was filled with memories. She then reveals that the last member, Blue Core Phantom Desha, had revolted against the new king, and had been thrown into the dungeon to await his death after getting his arms and legs broken. Aang was furious to learn how they treated his fellow comrade. His anger boiled over, resulting in his demonic aura being unleashed. He shouts at Lena, wondering why she hasn't joined forces with their supporters to overthrow the new king. She hears him and reveals that the current king was the only triple-core septuple finned warrior. She believed that even the Aang from the past known as the strongest human warrior wouldn't be able to beat the new king. She knew that Aang had noticed that the current 6 talents had all surpassed the past versions as they were double-core septuple finned warriors. But Aang still wanted to break Desha from out of the dungeon as he couldn't watch him die. His mind was filled with thoughts about how they had achieved a triple core. But as he was thinking, Lena tells him that there was a way. With a serious look in her eye, she asks Aang if he was aware of the elemental powers that the demons currently hold. After hearing about the words elemental power, Aang was curious about it, so Lena explains to him that the demons of the current time don't just simply have the red to black cores anymore. Aside from those 6 types, they had also now evolved the 5 different elements as well. Which was why the current generation of demons were even more difficult to defeat as compared to before in their time. Aang knew of those things as the 5 great elements, consisting of wood, fire, earth, metal and water. Which means that within his body so far, he was only missing the earth element. This is giving Aang the last bender vibes. After hearing about the elements, Aang wanted to know what it has to do with the warriors. Lena reveals to him that the warriors of today were able to combine the different types of elemental powers together. Aang was stunned to hear that the warriors of today were capable of that, believing that combining elemental powers were the same as his ability to control the elements. Lena further explains that there isn't just the stark difference in power between the quadruple and quintuple finned warriors. The current quintuple finned warriors who are strong enough often try their best to fight for a precious core called the integration core. Those warriors would enter a place called Dagora's castle in order to obtain more of that power to combine their elemental powers. The place she mentioned was somewhere that Aang was familiar with as he could easily recall what it was to him. In the past, he had led one of humanity's toughest battles against the demons in that place. That place is now called the Cemetery of Dagora's Castle. He wonders if the place got its current name because of how that castle ended up being the center of countless battles. Lena continues to say that ever since the battle for Dawn, there have been countless humans buried beneath those corpses on that battlefield. Until one day, someone found a strange type of demon that they had never seen before. That unique demon turned out to be a quintuple finned demon, but what made it different was that, in the space where the demons were supposed to have a demonic core, it had an integration core instead. It was a unique core that allowed warriors to be able to combine their elemental powers. But that doesn't mean that every single warrior was strong enough to use it. To her knowledge, only quintuple finned warriors and above can use the combination. They needed to be able to sustain a ridiculous amount of physical resistance. Aang immediately questions her on whether he would be able to combine all 5 elemental types if he has that integration core, but Lena straightaway rejects his idea, calling it impossible to combine all 5 elemental powers together, stating that he could only combine with one. It turns out that all 5 elements have a negative or positive relationship with each other. No one has succeeded in combining multiple elemental powers, so in theory, it's impossible for a human body to be able to contain more than one elemental power. Even the current king in the new 6 talents could only combine with one elemental power. This was shocking news to Aang as he just realized that they could manage to combine their elemental powers too. Looking back at his fight with Dylan, he couldn't even tell. Lena figured that Dylan wasn't even using his full strength, considering that the protective shield might not have been able to protect the audience if he had. She also knew that Dylan was a ridiculously conscious guy about his public image. If he had gone all out from the beginning, then Aang probably wouldn't stand a chance against him. Although Lena didn't want to admit it, the new 6 talents and their new king's strength had far exceeded that of the strength the former 6 talents and Aang had all those years ago. Not only do they have double cores, they also have elemental powers, which was one of the reasons why she wasn't able to save Desha from the dungeon. Deep in his thoughts, Aang knew that he already had 4 different kinds of elemental powers within his body, which made him wonder if it was because of the octuple finned demon within him. But if Lena was right, even if he was to compare himself to the new 6 talents, such as Dylan, Aang could clearly see that he was far too weak against them. As a warrior, he couldn't keep relying on the demon within him for its strength. In order to rescue his former comrade, Desha, Aang was now determined more than ever to make himself even stronger than before. After hearing everything from Lena, Aang tells her that he had decided to make his way to the cemetery of Dagora's castle himself. But Lena was worried since Aang wasn't a quintuple-finned warrior yet, and that there was a huge power difference between a quadruple-finned warrior to a quintuple-finned warrior. But Aang knew all of this. Because the power difference was something that he had made a theory since his time from long ago, but in this current lifetime of his, Aang decided to no longer follow those same rules anymore, as he believes that he can break through those past restrictions himself. We now change scenes to see that Paris and Aang were walking through the streets of the city. Aang had brought her out in order to tell the person in charge about the energy crystal he needed. Afterwards, he decided to leave. Paris could only stretch her body as she had been awakened from her sleep, but she couldn't help comment that the youths of these days were so full of energy. She then assures Aang that she would personally guide him to the person in charge and vouch for him, but as he turns around to thank her for kindness, a familiar voice could be heard, mentioning that they had resolved the issue with reissuing Helios City's energy crystal. The familiar voice continued to say that they were going to make their way to the Warrior Combat Center to request for more aid. Lu could be seen, walking closely behind that familiar voice, who turns out to be their squad leader Jin. Aang could finally see his long-lost teammates right in front of him, causing him to stop. As Paris shouts Aang's name out loud, wanting to know why he stopped, Lu manages to hear it, causing her to turn around to see where it came from. An image of Aang was reflected in her eyes as she saw him. Her voice along with her body trembled as she pointed out to the others about Aang's presence. The entire Helios City team had finally found one another in the crowd of the city. The moment Aang called out to his team, they immediately made a mad dash towards him, even with their mouths wide open. Snow and Wei were the first to flung themselves towards Aang out of pure joy upon being reunited. Jin was excited to see him as well, giving him a firm handshake. He could also see that Aang had grown more muscles too. Snow, on the other hand, could notice that Aang had actually grown taller from the time they were apart. Aang explains that his physical transformation might have been affected because of the demonic cores he had. Snow then explains to him that they were here in the city with Brian City's instructor to watch the competition, and that Lu had been keeping an ear out for any news about him. Which was why they eventually left Brian's team in order to gather more information and to search for him. But somehow, they ended up with a wrong lead, which was why they ended up coming to Dawn City instead. Jin had also settled the issue with the energy crystal being redistributed first, so Jin explains that they were planning on looking for Aang afterwards, but they never thought that they would find him in the Dawn City too. Aang was glad to hear that the issue with the energy crystal had been resolved, as he had originally planned on negotiation with the representative about that too. Paris, who was behind him, could hear that Aang's issues were resolved now, so with a smile on her face, she leaves the Helios team alone to be reunited. Seeing that she was leaving, Jin thanked her for taking care of Aang this entire time, but Paris corrected him, saying that she and Pictia City were the ones that Aang had been taking care of. The moment Paris left them, Snow leans in to Aang and whispers that he needed to have a little talk with Lu, explaining that since he left them, she hasn't been able to eat most of the time. Wei even brought out her camera to show Aang some pictures she took of Lu, showing how dark her face is, and how it looks as though her spirit has left her body. Even though everyone had spoken to Aang, Lu remained silent with a dark look on her face. Aang slowly walked out to her, and called out to Lu saying, "Leader, I'm here to report for duty. Sorry for making you worry." Upon hearing those words from Aang, Lu's face started to gain color as she becomes embarrassed. She simply gives Aang a light punch on his chest, looking at him with sincere eyes. She tells him that next time, don't leave the team on your own like that. Aang could only smile and agree to what she said. As the Helios team started to chat about their reunion, a familiar green hood was seen in the alleyway near them. It turns out to be Lena, who was watching them closely. She couldn't help but smile after seeing the situation Aang was in. After all, it reminded her of how they were many years ago. We now begin this chapter with a scene of a place filled with skeletons. Aang and Lu could be seen together. She was out of breath, carrying Aang on her shoulder slowly through the hallway. She told him to hold on as Aang was bleeding heavily as the corpses of demonic beings surrounded them. It looks like Aang was unconscious but was holding tightly onto an integration core in his hand. Covered in wounds, Lu was trying her best to get them to a safe place, telling Aang repeatedly that he couldn't fall asleep and that he needed to stay with her. But as she tries her best to carry him to a safe place, Aang's hand appears to slowly lose its strength, and eventually, he lets go of the integration core, allowing it to roll across from them. Reminder, the integration core was something that allows warriors to integrate the elemental powers of a demon. After dropping the core, numerous demonic beings appeared in the shadows above them, laughing at the fact that there were only low-level warriors present, and that this was the end for all of them. One of the demonic beings jumps down, roaring at Lu and screaming for death. Lu wasn't able to react in time to the demon's surprise attack, resulting in her being stabbed in the chest. The demon's attack was strong enough to throw her across the hallway, but it could still see that she was barely moving. Aang was bleeding on the ground next to her, so she tried to reach out to him. In her final moments, she realized how weak she was, and apologized to Aang for not being able to protect him. As she tried to reach Aang for the last time, Lu woke up all of a sudden with a scream. She was breathing heavily while being in her nightgown, slowly realizing that what she saw was simply a dream she had. But as she got up from her bed, she wondered why it felt so real, even the pain of being stabbed. As she lets out a deep breath, she tells herself to forget it as there was no use in thinking about it. Looking at her body, she could see that she had sweated quite a bit, and decided to take a bath. But as she was going to, Aang slams her door wide open, concerned about her as he had heard her shouting just now. But as he spots what she was wearing, Aang became shy all of a sudden and realized that he had made a mistake. Seeing his rude action, Lu answers back with the words "you pervert" and with a pillow to Aang's face. But her attacks don't stop there, as Lu continues to whack the shit out of Aang, scolding him for entering a girl's room without knocking, being beaten ruthlessly. Aang tried to reason that he did it because of her screaming, but it only resulted in him being beaten up even more. Eventually, after the beating, our boy was kicked out of the room. After preparing her stuff, Lu and Aang had left the C-rank city's hotel. But as Aang called Lu by her name, she appears annoyed with him, telling Aang to call her leader instead. Which he smiles and agrees to without hesitation. He asks if she had rested well since they had a long schedule ahead of them today. Lu tells him that she did, even though she had a nightmare, but what's more embarrassing to her was that just moments ago, something embarrassing happened, and yet, Aang still had the same calm look on his face. With a map out, Aang explains to Lu that they will be making their way to a C-rank city, a place that they have to pass through in order to get to the cemetery of Dagora's castle, so if they make their way there at full speed, they should be able to reach the cemetery of Dagora's castle before evening. But there was a condition to enter the castle: they needed to win a battle against the city guards, or else, they would be seen as trespassers. Which would be troublesome for them. Lu recalled that Jin had mentioned before that the castle is now an important strategic location these days, as it was designated as a place where quintuple-finned warriors that are strong enough are able to obtain the integration core. A wall was specifically built around the place, and there are a couple of high-rank warrior military groups stationed around it as well. The entire city's external areas are guarded closely, not just to prevent warriors from entering illegally, but also to prepare for the day when the demons inside might come out. That's a defensive mechanism against whatever is inside the castle too. Hearing that, Aang questions Lu on whether she was afraid to enter the castle with him, that even though it was a request from Jin, he never thought that she would agree to it that easily. Especially since it's a place that only quintuple-finned warriors dare to step foot in. Lu explains that Jin was more worried about how reckless Aang was going to be, and without a green core regeneration type warrior with him, he would be in danger, and it just so happens that Lu was a green core warrior. Turning around, she explains to Aang that she wasn't doing this for him as she had a mission of her own too. Jin wanted Lu to level up together with Aang, so by the time they were back, Lu would have raised her rank to double-finned warrior. But within her mind, Lu was furious over how Aang was able to level up so quickly. He had gone from a single-finned warrior to a quadruple-finned warrior in such a short time, showing her how good he was, which made her mad. Aang understood her reasons. After all, he recalled that Snow and Wei were also receiving special training from Jin in order to level up. Lu reminds him that she was the leader of this team, and in light of how Aang had left his team on his own previously, she was also here to keep an eye on him. Seeing her look on when they had first reunited, Aang couldn't help it but smile to himself. When Lu spots it, her first reaction to his smile was that it seemed lewd to her, making her think that he was thinking about that embarrassing moment from earlier on. The scene then changes to a battlefield-like area where numerous warriors were gathered together, shouting and requesting for different types of warriors, from green core regeneration type to agility type warriors, where they had to at least be a quintuple-finned core warrior. This place is the cemetery of Dagora's castle, the main door core testing battle preparation zone. Aang and Lu had finally arrived at the castle where the integration core was inside. But as they walked past the other warriors, they were soon noticed by them. The crowd around them couldn't believe that there was a quadruple and single-finned core warrior together, making them believe that Aang and Lu's thirst for power had driven them crazy and that they were only here to provide nutrients to the demons inside the castle. They continued to make fun of them, calling them a couple and betting that Aang and Lu wouldn't even make it past the strength test. Hearing all those remarks, Aang could only laugh at them. Unleashing their auras as they walked, Aang tells Lu that apparently, they were being looked down upon. From out of the crowd of warriors, 3 of them stood out to make fun of Aang and Lu in front of everyone. Aang turns around to see who it was as the voice asks Aang if he was copying him by bringing a girl with him inside the castle. It turns out that the bully was a red-haired kid who had a nurse beside him, along with a huge man with an eye patch and axe standing behind. He continues to make fun of Aang, being just a quadruple-finned bastard. He couldn't believe that a quadruple-finned warrior was bringing along a single-finned warrior to fight within the castle. He tells them that their heads were going to roll before they realized it. Lu could only call the red-haired kid trash after hearing his rude comments about them, but Aang tells him not to bother, since there was no need for them to mess with such a low-level insult. It turns out that the red-haired kid was someone important as the other warriors around him noticed who he was. He was the young master from the Eula city's mayor family, called Uther. They couldn't believe that he was back here again to take another integration core. The crowd of warriors also noticed that the huge man with an axe, brought by Uther, was a sextuple-finned warrior. They could see that his family was able to hire an elite warrior. They also knew him from his profile on the mercenary list, proving that he is really strong, but they never thought he would be working for the mayor family now. Another warrior knew more about the mercenary, recalling that he had an integration core and had already found an elemental power that suits him. Under his protection, the warriors all guessed that Uther will be the one to obtain the integration core this time around. Uther introduces himself to Aang and Lu, flexing his family's reputation as the Meyer family as the Eula city's greatest family of warriors. Looking at Lu, he warns her to listen to his advice, that the castle wasn't a place for her to play in. As he notices that Lu was a green core warrior, Uther grabs tightly onto the nurse's mountains, causing her to moan loudly. He extends his hand to Lu, telling her that he was missing a personal healer to hold on his right side, and that he didn't mind making an exception and accepting her for that position. But all his words mean nothing as someone laughs. Uther could see that Aang and Lu were talking amongst themselves, ignoring his words completely and not even giving him a single reply. This angers Uther as he shouts at them for not recognizing his family's name, and starts to scold Lu with a bunch of insults. This causes her to snap as she shouts back at Uther, asking him who gave him the right to talk to her. Her shouting was enough to scare the shit out of Uther and his personal nurse as they watched in horror over Lu's reaction. She continues to scold Uther, telling him that he was a piece of trash for constantly using his family's reputation in every sentence. Hearing this made the boy snap as he threw the nurse hard onto the ground while insulting Lu back, warning her that he could kill her by just lifting one of his fingers. But our girl wasn't backing down. In a calm manner, she explained that she knew that she was not as strong as him right now, but assured Uther that she wasn't going to go down that easily. But within her mind, she was scolding Uther that as a perverted bastard, he had no right to be angry, and that she wasn't scared to beat him up. Tired of using words, Uther launches himself straight at Lu, planning to put the single-finned warrior in her place. But before he could touch her with his dirty hand, Aang appears out of the blue, grabbing onto Uther's hand in an instant. Just by grabbing his hand, Aang manages to stop Uther's attack on Lu. Seeing what happened, Uther threatens Aang that he was going to trash him alongside Lu if he didn't step down, but Aang reminded him that he was the one that provoked them first, and the one that instigated the fight first. So he knew that if word gets out, it would be bad for the Meyer family. He also points out to Uther that if he causes trouble here, then the guards wouldn't let him into the castle. Which was why Aang wanted them to talk things out first, since Uther's hand was trembling while Aang was holding it. Not willing to reason with words, Uther starts to activate his ability to start the fight instead, but the mercenary he hired calls out to him, stopping him in his actions. The mercenary points out to Uther that Aang wasn't wrong, and that all the warriors here are all worthy warriors with considerable strength. Meaning that it wouldn't look good for him since he might end up with a bad reputation the moment he arrived here. But the mercenary had a plan in mind. He leans in close to Uther, whispering to him that if he really wanted to teach Aang and Lu a lesson, he didn't have to do it now or here, as the most important thing right now was for them to enter the castle first. Because anything can happen within that castle. Hearing the mercenary's words closely, Uther smiles as he understands the hidden meaning behind them, so he withdraws his blue core ability. He finally snaps his hand away from Aang's, telling the both of them that he wasn't going to argue with them anymore and decided to part ways. As the mercenary walks past Aang, he couldn't help but give our boy the side eye. Sneakily, he uses his own earth elemental energy, stomping the ground with his reddish aura, which causes the tiny pebbles on the ground to float and fly towards Aang at an incredible speed. Without moving from his spot, Aang causally plucks them out of the air with just one arm. Lu notices something and asks Aang about what was wrong, he calmly tells her that it was nothing, just some mosquitoes. But as he hid the stones from her, his hand was glowing bright gold. He urges her that they should go and take the test, as he was sure that they would be able to pass smoothly. It turns out that Aang had used the metal element skill called Hardened Skin to catch the mercenary's sneaky stone attack. The mercenary was able to see that Aang had secretly countered his earth elemental attack by using just his hand, not to mention his insane reaction speed. The mercenary had expected for Aang's hand to be punctured immediately. Sensing that something was off about Aang, the mercenary went to Uther. He informs him that they needed to make changes to their list of potential competitors for the integration core, as he believed that Aang was the opponent that will pose the greatest threat to them, since he was sure that Aang had the strength beyond that of a quadruple-finned warrior. And right now, he couldn't even measure Aang's true strength. So he suggests to Uther that they find a chance to kill Aang and Lu, so that they could prevent them from growing stronger. A handheld scanner was used to test Aang's and Lu's synchronization rate, which was 54 and 42%. And since there were no level restrictions, it meant that the both of them had definitely passed their synchronization rate test. Aang was impressed by Lu's score. After all, he remembered her having it at 39% the last time they tested it. He could also see that she just didn't raise her level to a single-finned warrior, but also raised her synchronization rate to 42%, which is an immense increase. After the test, the tester was checking their credentials and could see that Aang and Lu were a quadruple and single-finned warrior, making her ask them if they really wanted to enter the castle to fight for the integration core. She warns them that the lowest-ranked demon inside was a triple-finned demon, giving them one last chance to back off now. But Aang assured her that they were strong enough to protect themselves, and pointed out that Lu was the healer of their team and an extremely agile warrior, so they were pretty confident as a team. Hearing Aang's remarks about her, Lu turned her face in disagreement, but within her mind she was pissed that she had been reduced to just a healer. Which was awful to her. The tester reveals to them that there has never been a warrior lower than a quintuple-finned warrior that has entered the castle. She knows that although they didn't have a level restriction, Aang's team is the lowest-leveled team in history to have entered the castle. As she had warned them earlier on, the integration core can only be found within the castle's unique integration core demon. These demons will only appear once every certain period of time. Once it is killed, it will take a good while before another one appears. So she knows that they won't just be fighting against demons, but also be up against many strong warriors, contestants. Just surviving would already be a huge challenge for them, so for the final time, she asks Aang and Lu if they still wanted to enter the castle. Aang, with a serious look on his face, thanks her for the warnings but assures the tester that their goal isn't to just survive. Accepting their request, the tester proceeded to point them to the entrance of the castle. Lu lets out a heavy breath. Looking at the castle, she thought that she would be scared of this terrifying, dangerous place, but instead, she strangely feels calm and confident, as if by just having Aang by her side, it made her feel as though her courage knows no bounds. And so, the pair of them enter the castle together. We are now looking at the scene from inside of the cemetery of Dagora's castle. Demons were gathered in groups and talking to one another. Aang and Lu were hiding behind a wall after noticing that this place had been completely overturned by the demons. Aang knew that there was a reason why the Dagora castle is called a castle despite being just a city. He asks Lu if she knew that Dagora castle was once a place that rivaled that of the City of Dawn. Because it was located in the middle of the country, Aang recalled that in the past, this place was thriving with life, but due to the demon invasion, it slowly descended into ruin. Eventually becoming a battlefield itself where Aang had personally fought in. After that, the ancient castle in the city, which acted as a central point for the entire continent, was taken over by demons, and no one dared to continue living there. Aang, with a sad look on his face, recounted that humanity had started to call this city a castle instead, probably so that they could forget about the city's past glory. Lu was impressed by Aang's knowledge of this place, but he simply tells her that these were stories that he had heard from when he was little. After chilling for a while, Aang decided that they needed to move. In order to find the unique demon that has the integration core, they also needed to preserve their energy and avoid unnecessary conflicts. But Lu could spot an explosion not far from them. Knowing that there was a fierce battle going on over there, she asks Aang if they should go and help. But he says no, explaining that at least within the castle, they shouldn't extend a helping hand to anyone. Aang said this to her because he knew that Lu had only lived in Helios City since she was young, which was why she still had so much compassion, but it meant that she had no idea of how evil this world can be. After all, Aang knew that the type of people they met at the castle's entrance, Uther and his ground, were only just a taste of what the majority of the warriors were gonna be. In here, there were going to be even more of these selfish and insufferable people. But as he turns around to tell Lu that they needed to be cautious by not lending anyone a helping hand, something shocks Aang. It turns out that a blue core finned demon was able to sneak up behind them, to the point that it was only inches away from Lu and Aang. The finned demon strikes the spot where they were without hesitation, but Aang was faster. He manages to grab Lu into his arms and bring her to safety. Which surprises the blue core finned demon, as it didn't expect for Aang to be able to react to its surprise attack that easily. Since its water elemental attack was both soundless and hard to detect, so what Aang did shouldn't have been possible. It's revealed that this blue core finned demon was a water element and quintuple. As Aang lets Lu stand up, she wonders how a quintuple finned demon managed to get behind them. She believes that it had used its water element to remain in a silent and fluid state. Utilizing its agility to draw closer to them, Lu knew that if Aang hadn't noticed it in time, then she would probably have been killed. Looking at the blue core finned demon, Aang suggests to her that they needed to kill it quickly, so as to not attract any more attention from the other demons, as well as the attention of any other warrior teams that were around them. Summoning his broadsword, Aang decided that they needed to go all out and to finish off the blue core finned demon quickly. Lu agrees with his plan, summoning her green core regeneration aura. In her mind, she has decided to not be careless anymore in order to not be a burden to Aang. The blue finned demon could hear Aang's plan about finishing it off quickly, so it started to laugh, as it couldn't believe that a quadruple finned warrior and single finned warrior was looking down on it. It calls it cute before disappearing in an instant in front of Aang and Lu, and reappearing in the air above them. As it stretched its arms from both sides, water droplets started to appear in its palms. The blue finned demon was casting an ability called the Rainfall's Waltz. The ability had transformed the water droplets in the sky into sharp spears made out of ice. Once the ability was casted finished, the blue finned demon aimed it towards Aang and Lu, raining down spears of ice straight towards them. Aang could see that it was an area of effect skill, so he shouts at Lu to come to him. As the spears of ice landed all around them, we could see tree branches appearing in the middle of the battle where Aang and Lu were. The blue core finned demon was confident in its skills, believing that with just a quadruple and single finned demon, it wouldn't even spare a single glance towards their corpses. But as it landed back on the ground to check, it was surprised to see a barrier made out of wood and metal elemental energy. Aang had managed to summon a barrier made out of wood and metal elemental energy, protecting himself and Lu completely from the spears made out of ice. But the blue core finned demon was confused on how it was possible for Aang to use two different types of elemental energies when only quintuple finned warriors could use the elements that way. But as it was left wondering, Aang took the chance to launch himself forward towards the demon. Seeing that Aang was coming to it instead, it stomps its foot hard into the ground, promising Aang that it was going to pierce him till he was full of holes. With that step, the blue core finned demon had summoned more ice spikes from the ground, aimed towards Aang. But he wasn't scared of it at all, because he could also use the water element, just like the demon. Using the water element, Aang had transformed himself into water in order to dodge the ice spikes that were coming from the ground. The blue core demon was stunned to see the speed of Aang, who reappears in his warrior form right below it, asking the demon if it was shocked. It turns out that the demon was fooling Aang this entire time, believing that even with the speed of the water element, Aang couldn't catch up with it. But Aang plays the Uno reverse card and shouts for Lu to appear. And so she does, appearing right behind the blue core finned demon this time. Unleashing her green core ability, Lu lands a massive dropkick directly on the back of the blue finned demon, pushing it towards Aang, who aims for its core straight away. He easily stabs the blue finned demon straight into its core using his broadsword. The match between the blue core finned demon against Aang and Lu ended with their victory. Aang hands over the quintuple blue core to Lu, using it as a symbol for their future fights together. As a single finned core warrior, Lu could only gracefully accept Aang's gift. While looking at the dead demon, she promises it that she wouldn't even give its body a single glance. After killing the quintuple blue core finned demon together, Aang couldn't help it but praised Lu for her movement and speed displayed earlier on. Hearing his comment, Lu had to remind Aang that her family, the Situ family, is a martial arts family, so obviously being fast with movement and speed were nothing to her. After pulling his broadsword out of the demon, Aang recommended that they leave this place quickly, since their fight earlier would have attracted the attention of others that were nearby. But as he turns to look for where they should go next, Lu notices that there was a cut across Aang's face, so she recommended to him that they find a safe place first so that she could heal him. Touching the wound on his face, Aang tells her that the small cut was nothing, and that there was no need to heal such a small wound. Lu appeared pissed off by his comment, reminding Aang that she was the one in charge of all the healing. As they had agreed upon before leaving, So regardless of the wound being small or big, healing was something that she needed to do, or else there would be no purpose to her being here with Aang. Seeing how charismatic she was when being serious, Aang finally understood Lu's nickname back in Helios City, the unsmiling Rakshasa of Helios City. Giving up the fight, Aang agreed with her idea and decided that they should take a little bit of a break first. But as they were done settling their small argument, Lu spots a gigantic shadow appearing above the both of them. She warns Aang to be careful as a warrior appears, swinging his massive axe towards them. The impact of the axe hitting the ground was like that of an earthquake, destroying everything in its path in a wide radius from where Aang and Lu were standing just a few moments ago. But it turns out that Aang didn't even bother to dodge like Lu did, he simply used his broadsword on his back to block the surprise attack. Looking at their current situation, Aang couldn't believe that they were being targeted already. The surprise attacker turns out to be Uther's mercenary for hire, who could see that he was right about Aang's strength being above the normal standards of a quadruple-finned core warrior. Not bothering for a chat, Aang pushes the mercenary away, telling him to get lost. But his remaining eye was still focused on Aang even after being pushed away. After all, this man is a sextuple-finned red core warrior that uses the earth elemental type. Lu could see that Aang was about to engage into a fight and immediately activated her green core to help him out, but something wrong happened, stopping her from joining Aang. The nurse that was Uther's playtop had appeared as well. This time, she had green needles poking close to Lu's entire body. She tells her that since her attention was focused on Aang this entire time, it was easy for her to anesthetize her easily. It turns out that the nurse was a triple-finned green core warrior and an anesthesiologist. Not being able to move at all, Lu could feel the power of the regeneration type's unique anesthesiologist skill. The nurse continues to explain to Lu that as another green core regeneration type warrior, she should know what kind of situation she was in now, and that if one uses the anesthesiologist skill, that was originally used to numb wounds and injected directly into the opponent's body, then the opponent will end up losing all the ability to move. After ensuring that Lu couldn't just in the fight, the nurse went on to Aang next. He saw her and figured out that it was the same group from the entrance, which was why they were targeted so easily. But Aang was curious, wondering why instead of protecting the precious young Master Uther they had chosen to ambush him and Lu, especially in a place where many have lost their lives. The douchebag appears and answers Aang's question, mocking Aang for trying to look strong even though he was about to die. Uther had appeared, laughing at Aang's current situation. He continued to mock our boy by saying that he was simply acting tough in front of his woman so that he wouldn't get embarrassed. Those words seemed to hurt Lu more than Aang as her entire body froze rock hard. Inside her mind again, she was mad for being called Aang's woman, but ignores that thought as it wasn't the right time for her to be angry. Uther once again touches the nurse, telling her not bad and that he was going to reward her properly when they got home. He then proceeds to touch Lu's lips, much to her horror, while telling her that he was going to take his time and play with her after watching Aang die. Uther even shows off by revealing that he had never been rejected by a woman before, which was why he found Lu particularly interesting. But his riz fails completely as his words simply awaken the inner demon within Lu as she looks at him with murder in her eyes. The mercenary calls out to Uther, wondering why he wasn't hiding himself as they agreed upon, since he was confident that he could kill Aang and bring the girl to him by himself. Uther simply tells him that hiding was way too depressing, and that he was confident with the mercenary around that no one else would dare to launch a sneak attack against them. He even reminds him that he was a quintuple-finned warrior, so he shouldn't look down on him that much. But as they were chatting, Aang's voice became demonic and serious, asking Uther if he didn't want his hand attached to his body anymore. A vicious red demonic aura was surrounding Aang's entire body. Originally, Aang thought that Uther was just a mere playboy delinquent, and that he wasn't planning on giving him too much attention. But now, it seems to Aang that Uther was truly the scummiest kind of bastard to exist. So he would like to confirm something for himself. With an angered look in his eyes, Aang questions Uther on whether he had harmed multiple young women. Uther, unaware of how serious Aang was being, laughs at our boy's words instead, calling him a quintuple-finned trash and promising Aang that he was going to taste his woman, Lu, all day and all night. The mercenary on the other hand, understood the seriousness behind Aang's words. He could only think of Uther as a stupid young master who has been pampered by his family, so he didn't have any idea who he was messing with. Thinking about the number of connections and strings Uther's powerful daddy had to pull to allow him to become a warrior, the mercenary could only see Uther as a joke of a warrior, who has never even killed a single demon on his own, and still has the audacity to mock others. Since the mercenary was a sextuple-finned warrior, he wouldn't be here with such a disgusting and annoying bastard like Uther if his family hadn't promised such a huge payment. The mercenary would have killed him a long time ago personally, but decides to forget about it. He reminds Uther that his father had instructed him to listen to all of his instructions, once they were out there, but before the mercenary could finish his sentence. Aang interrupts him, by telling Uther that right now, he didn't have any problems ending his life. Covered in his demonic flame, Aang charges straight towards Uther, ignoring the sextuple mercenary warrior and leaving him behind. The mercenary shouts at Uther to watch out and sprints closely behind Aang, but looking at him closely, he wonders why Aang had the fire elemental energy around his body. Since he was just a quadruple-finned warrior, it made no sense that he could control elemental energy. As Aang continues to charge towards Uther, who could only watch in horror, he declares with his glowing eyes and fist that bastards like Uther, who do nothing but tarnish the title of warriors, do not deserve to live this world. Seeing death come for him, Uther screams like a little bitch, falling backwards. He begs Aang not to come to him while wondering why he couldn't even put up the courage to fight against a quadruple-finned warrior. But as he looks at Aang with fear, he could no longer see him as human but a version of the demon god. He continues to scream for someone to save him, but as Aang was near him, the mercenary appears right above, priming his axe to hit Aang. As he tries to take Aang's left arm, our boy manages to twist his body in the air to avoid the surprise attack. Using his broadsword, Aang fires back and manages to push the mercenary far away from him. The mercenary was impressed by Aang's swift agility and reaction speed and could see that Aang was capable of utilizing the fire elemental energy. By using his own elemental energy, the mercenary was confident that he wasn't that weak. But as he blocks Aang's fire attack, he could spot tree branches appearing behind as well, causing him to jump further away in order to escape the sudden wood elemental energy attack. He twists his neck in the last moments, dodging most of the tree spikes as a few managed to cut him. As he tried to regain his footing, the mercenary was confused about how Aang was able to control the wood element too. But a smile creeps over his face as he finds it interesting instead. He slams his axe into the ground this time, knowing that Aang was hiding a ton of secrets. And that he was able to actually manipulate two different types of elements. As the rocks from the ground wraps itself around his axe, the mercenary tells Aang that he was interested in how he was able to do those things. Knowing that if he could manipulate two elemental powers as well, then he would become much stronger than he was now. The mercenary had unleashed his own ability. Using the earth elemental energy, he created the rock scythe. Filled with confidence, the mercenary declares that within 10 minutes, he was going to fight Aang till he spills all of his secrets. Hearing that, Aang decided to go with another power this time, using a familiar purplish aura around his hand. Soon enough, a blue demonic hand appears onto the mercenary's axe handle. Aang had finally unleashed his corpse manipulation ability, and had summoned back the quintuple-finned blue core demon, back from the dead, to deal with the mercenary this time around. The mercenary this time started to feel afraid. He was shocked over the fact that a demon managed to come this close to him, and that he couldn't even sense its demonic aura. As he activates his core, the mercenary couldn't believe that he only realized it after the demon was able to take a hold of his axe. Making a quick choice, he abandons his weapon in the demon's hand, and dashes away to a safe distance from where he could see that it was a quintuple-finned demon. The water demon lets go of the battle axe, transforming itself into water and rushes to kill the mercenary, who repeatedly blocks its attack after seeing that the quintuple-finned demon was an agility water type. As he defends himself from the attacks of the demon, he turns around to face Aang, asking him to put a hold on their own fight in order to deal with the quintuple-finned demon together. But Aang was smiling at the mercenary's situation, asking him why he thinks that the demon was only attacking him. With a smile, and a wave of his finger, Aang orders the demon to do something else now. It turns out that he had made the water demon unleash its skill called Torrential Waltz, summoning numerous ice spikes in the air, all aimed towards the mercenary. He couldn't believe that Aang was able to control the demon, and that a demon was a controlled corpse that belongs to him. All this could only make him wonder how much strength Aang was hiding till now as he summons his Earth Dragon Shield in order to defend against the water demon's attack. The shield he created was strong enough to deflect all the ice spikes that came to him. Aang was watching the mercenary closely, impressed on how capable he was, which was expected of a warrior being employed by a reputable clan. After hiding in his shield for a while, the mercenary decides to do something else. He stretches his arm out, calling for his axe to come, while it sheds the stones off its blade. Just like Thor's hammer, the axe is summoned back by its owner, spinning at a fast rate towards the blue core-finned demon as well. The axe manages to land itself just inches away from the back of the finned demon, but at the very last second, the blue-finned demon bends it like Beckham, dodging the axe's surprise attack. The mercenary couldn't believe that the demon was able to do that, because he had removed the gigantic axe form for higher speed, and yet, the demon still dodged his attack. Turning back to look at Aang, he knew that it was probably because of him. With his power of controlling demons, the mercenary couldn't help but think that Aang might actually be a septuple finned warrior. But he brushes that thought aside, knowing that right now, he had to deal with the water-finned demon first. But as he moves in to engage with the demon, tree branches appear from underneath the ground based on the powers of the wood elemental energy, grabbing a hold of his ankles and stopping him from moving as the finned demon looks like it's about to body slam him. The mercenary couldn't move at all and could only face the attack of the finned demon head-on, as both their forces collided with one another, destroying everything near them. This time, the mercenary was bleeding from his mouth as he held out against the finned demon. He knew that if the demon was alone, then it wouldn't be an issue. The problem was Aang, who was using sneak attacks against him as well. Uther, the coward, was hiding behind the nurse this time, ordering her to go and quickly kill the demon first. But she tells him that she specializes in healing, not in fighting. And that she had to maintain her skill in order to keep Lu from moving. But as the two were arguing with one another, Lu was on the move. She could feel that her left hand was able to move slightly. Back to the coward, he was telling the nurse that he no longer cares about Lu, and that what matters now is his safety because of the demon. After all, they wouldn't be getting paid if he gets even a single scratch. But as the nurse tries her best to talk with Uther, Lu appears and stabs the hoe straight in her chest from the back using the same green spike. Surprising Uther, as she stabs the nurse, Lu tells him that she pities the fool. As a warrior he should have been trying his best to fight, and not hide. The nurse was stunned by Lu's sneak attack as she couldn't even move her body this time, but she also questions Lu on how she was able to undo her skill. Lu explains that she was a green core warrior too, so she had memorized everything related to all kinds of recovery and healing support type skills. As long as she could use her energy to cause the nurse skill to flow in the opposite direction, then the paralysis would be reversed. After all, a regeneration support type can both save or kill people. The nurse's eyes started to close after hearing Lu's explanation, revealing that the single-finned warrior was a regeneration support type genius. After the nurse fell to the ground, Lu tells Uther that he was next, and that she had avoided piercing any internal organs of the nurse, but it was all up to her to survive in the end. But Uther's ending was going to be different. This, she promises to him. Uther was angry over Lu's sneak attack. After all, it came from a single-finned warrior, who dares to use such underhanded methods like this. But the coward was confident this time. Although he couldn't fight demons, Uther was sure that he could at least defeat a single-finned warrior like Lu. But Lu was able to see that his breathing was unstable, and that his stance was awkward, as though Uther never had any real battle experience. She figures out that he was probably one of those quintuple-finned warriors who were nurtured by loads of resources from their family, and simply existed to achieve more fame and reputation for their clan. After all, to Lu, delinquents like Uther have brought shame to their statuses as warriors, making her angry beyond hell. Uther was mad at Lu's true but harsh words. He wonders how she knew that he didn't have any battle experience. In a flashback, we could see that for the past 10 years, Uther's father would invite many strong warriors to help him endure the immense burden from the cores, even though the process was immensely painful, and every time that he went through it, he would end up peeing himself. But he still managed to complete the process under the protection of all those hired warriors, allowing him to climb up successfully to become a quintuple warrior. For this trip to the cemetery castle, his father had spent a lot of money to hire the mercenary to protect him, along with a healer to save him if things had gone bad. Uther could have obtained the elemental core without any hassle at all, but looking at Lu right now, he realized that everything was now ruined. All because of Lu and Aang. So he turns to shout at the mercenary who was busy battling against the water core finned demon, ordering him to return to his side to do his job of protecting him, since that was why his father has given him so many resources. Uther continues to scream and shout at the mercenary to obey his orders right now, but he was busy dealing with Aang and the blue-finned demon. Uther's constant shouting and ordering seems to anger the mercenary as he gritted his teeth hard upon hearing Uther's voice once again. He finally snaps himself, shouting back at Uther that he was just a piece of trash and to just keep his mouth shut. Those words were enough to stun the dumb young master. But as he continued to shout at the mercenary, Lu decided it was time to take action. Uther sees this and activates his blue core ability, but Lu manages to dash right behind him, before he could even react. In one swift motion, she was able to stab Uther on his side with the dagger she was holding from before. He definitely feels the pain as he tries to hurt Lu, but misses due to her fast speed. But as she backs away from him, Uther starts to experience intense headaches. Looking at him closely, Lu knew that Uther didn't even know how to use his energy, and that if he activates the immense strength within the quintuple finned core on his core carelessly, something bad is gonna happen. A flashback is seen from where Jin was giving the team a lecture. He informs them that if a warrior ends up suffering a backlash from the immense energy within their core, they will become uncontrollable. So they should distance themselves immediately upon meeting such warriors. Since it was impossible to determine just what they might do in that dangerous situation, if they ended up fighting one another, they would be heavily injured. So he tells them that in case they were to suffer backlash from the energy in your core, they needed to stay calm and to reroute the energy to a familiar pathway within their body. Or else, they will end up being blown up by the ferocious energy within themselves. After recalling that lecture from Jin, Lu starts to smile and charges straight to Uther, who was unstable right now, because she wanted him to explode. A suitable ending for a douchebag. While unaware that he was slowly losing control, Uther was excited to see Lu charging straight at him, as he believed that she was challenging him right now. As she goes near him, he tries to cut her but fails as Lu sidesteps and dodges his knife attack easily. But Uther wasn't done with his attack yet. He uses his blue core ability right now, unleashing his skill called Accelerated Assassination Stab. It sends numerous stab attacks from all directions at Lu. Even though there was a huge power difference between them, Lu was still able to keep up with Uther, blocking each and every one of his attacks as they danced across the battlefield. Uther was confident because of the fact that he was a blue core agility type warrior, so in his mind, a green core regeneration type like Lu could never compare to him in terms of speed. Lu simply tells him to shut up as she continues to block most of his attacks, but some of them manage to land on her, cutting her face and shoulder. She recalled that compared to the agility training that she was put through by her father since young, the attacks of a quintuple core warrior should have immense strength. But there was no form nor technique to Uther's stabs. He's just blindly stabbing the area around him. But after attacking Lu for quite a while, Uther became angry over the fact that a green core warrior like her was able to parry his agility type quick attack. To Lu, all she needed to defeat Uther completely was to find a single opening in his attack, which is right now. After dodging his last attack by ducking, Lu lands a powerful blow directly onto Uther's blue core, located on his chest. After landing her attack, Lu tells Uther that her father had once quoted to her that even if a person has immense strength, if they don't know how to utilize it, then they wouldn't be able to display even a single % of their original power. With that, she removes her knife from Uther's body, causing him to scream in pain once again. His anger decides to take over as Uther screams out loud that as the young master of the Meyer family, Lu shouldn't dare to look down on him and that everyone here should die. Much to Lu's shock, Uther's body had lost control of the demonic core in his chest, causing his body to expand with blue bubbles forming everywhere. She quickly backs away from Uther, who is now a ticking time bomb. She didn't realize how fast the rate of his combustion was going to be. Since she couldn't avoid it now, Lu decides to take a final stand. Stabbing her knife into the ground, she decides to face the explosion head-on with her protective shield. Uther was screaming in pain in his final moments as he reached the climax of his life. Aang and the mercenary had taken a pause in their own battle due to the energy that Uther was releasing. Aang could see this and was worried about Lu. So he immediately dashes over to her side, ignoring the mercenary, who couldn't believe that the stupid young master had ended up exploding because of a single finned warrior. Soon enough, a massive blue explosion occurred, resulting in the immediate death of Uther. After the explosion, as the smoke began to clear, a giant crater was seen from where Aang and Lu were. Lu had survived, believing that her protective shield was the one that saved her. But as she opens her eyes to a familiar voice, Aang was there, knowing that she had made a quintuple finned warrior lose control of his energy and explode. He tells her that she had done a great job. It turns out that Aang was fast enough to save her from the explosion. He had created a defensive shield wall using his metal and wood elemental energy. Seeing that he was here now, Lu finally collapses, explaining that Uther doesn't have the true strength of a quintuple finned warrior, combined with his extremely low willpower along with no prior battle experience. Lu concluded that Uther wasn't even as good as an experienced single-finned warrior. But deep down she was glad, or else a single-finned warrior like her would never have been able to win against a quintuple-finned warrior. Their fight would have ended instantly if Uther was an actual experienced warrior. After hearing that, Aang could spot that Lu had been hurt in the fight against Uther, so he urges her to quickly heal herself. Even Lu couldn't see that she was covered in numerous wounds as her uniform had cuts all over. Taking the chance, Aang praises her for the amazing courage and fantastic decision-making she had done in the fight against Uther. Hearing that from Aang, Lu couldn't help but blush at his sudden comment. She turns her head away from him immediately, shouting at Aang to stop talking to her, while changing the topic to his own fight that he had on the other side with the sextuple-finned warrior. But in her mind, Lu was going crazy over why Aang had suddenly started praising her. Looking at where the mercenary was, Aang knew that the demon he was controlling had evaporated in the explosion that happened just now, which isn't that much of a surprise to him as it was just a corpse without any consciousness, but for the warrior, it was a different story as he was a sextuple-finned warrior. Speak and he shall appear. The mercenary's shadow appeared in the dust and smoke, telling Aang and Lu that it was a great thing that the useless young master had finally died, but he was frustrated that even though he could escape from the Meyer family, he knew that he will probably end up being hunted down by the warrior assassins from the other family clans. We are now introduced to a new organization, called the Warriors Assassins. An underground organization that operates based on their greed. These wayward and criminal warrior organizations only seek to accept requests to assassinate other warriors, listing their services at ridiculous prices. There were also rumors of an extremely powerful septuple-finned warrior in that particular organization as well. But no amount of money could satisfy the conditions to employ warrior assassins of such levels. Instead, an exchange deal that's worth the price of the task must be given. The mercenary informs Aang and Lu that he wasn't going to fight them anymore, since they both had monstrous talents. Despite having such low-level cores, they were still able to show off immense strength. Aang agrees with him, knowing that there was no need for them to continue fighting against each other. Aang knew that he was right, that since the person he was tasked to protect was dead, then in this battlefield, the mercenary no longer had any notices to continue the fight. The mercenary also knew that if Aang was seriously fighting against him and had utilized his skills together with the undead water-finned demon, then he probably wouldn't be able to escape. Controlling the elemental powers, having dominion over the corpses of demons, he could see that Aang was hiding a lot of secrets. Making the mercenary wonder where Aang's true strength came from, Aang calmly tells him that he was simply a quintuple-finned warrior with a slightly more unique ability, and that he would have been in danger as well if the mercenary had used all of his sextuple-finned strength to battle in a fight to the death against Aang. Hearing Aang's explanation, the mercenary could only wonder what kind of rare genius Aang was to have a unique ability, since he had heard rumors that some warriors who were extremely talented were able to utilize abilities that regular warriors were not able to. Knowing that Aang was able to master his powers over the elemental powers, the mercenary was curious about why Aang would be in the cemetery castle and looking for the integration crystal, which should be of no use to him. Aang simply replies with a smile on his face that it was none of his business. But in his mind, he knew that the mercenary was right, since the original integration crystal was used to allow quintuple-finned warriors to be able to utilize elemental powers for themselves. But Aang wanted to try, thinking that if the integration core would be able to allow a warrior to combine their elemental powers, then the various elemental energies that he has would be meshed into one. And using the elemental core to combine all 5 elements, Aang was curious about what the result would be if he was able to achieve it. After all, he needed to think of some other ways to strengthen himself. As one of the members of the old 6 talents, Desha would not be imprisoned in a place that's easy for him to break into. If Aang wanted to rescue Desha, then he couldn't always rely on the powers of the demon inside his body, since he might have to face the new king and the new 6 talents. The mercenary decides to leave first, but leaves a piece of advice to Aang and Lu, suggesting that they leave this place quickly as Uther's self-explosion would have attracted a lot of demons and any warriors to this place. And due to the nature of where they were, it was important that they try their best to save themselves. And so, the mercenary has left this chapter, wishing Aang and Lu the best in their endeavors. After the intense fight, Aang and Lu continued on their journey of finding the integration demon, tracking footprints in the dirt. Meeting and fighting new demons, finding comrades among other warriors, and finding peace to sleep and rest. As night arrives, Lu was in a sleeping bag, asking Aang about whether he was going to sleep or not. He replies that she should sleep first and that he was going to take a nap later. But before she slept, Lu wondered about Aang's fighting abilities, his ability to socialize so easily with others, as well as other things that he was experienced in. Even though he wasn't that much older than the rest of the Helios City team, Lu could only wonder where he got all the experience from. Aang thought about it deeply before telling Lu that he was just naturally gifted with all of these kinds of talents. Hearing that kind of reply made Lu think of Aang as an old uncle. Her comment about him being old causes Aang to think about his past life. The next day, Aang and Lu were drawn to the sounds of someone fighting nearby. Aang could sense that there was a demon's aura down below them, and that the energy fluctuation was a complete mess over there, as it seems that there were a lot of multiple warriors on the run. All of these things lead Aang to believe that the integration demon had appeared. So he immediately turns to Lu to tell her to follow him as he had an idea on how to get to the demon before anyone else. Soon enough, the two of them jump across buildings, before heading down. Lu could spot that Aang was very happy for some reason, but he simply tells her that he was excited. The reason Aang was so excited right now was because for the first time, he was going to meet a new demon type that he had never met before. Especially since he had already battled all types of demons in his previous life. And right now, he was curious about this integration crystal demon. With excitement in his eyes, Aang makes a mad dash to the integration demon, hoping to beat everyone else. As Aang and Lu park cars throughout the cemetery castle, Aang informs her that the demon has slowed down a lot, which means that it probably found a hiding spot. This was an opportunity for them to drag it out to the open. Lu couldn't believe that Aang was able to detect the location of where the integration demon was, since the environment around them was far too large, it wouldn't be easy for them to find it. But Aang was confident, assuring Lu that he had a way to find it without any issues. Although Aang didn't want to admit it, but ever since that elemental core demon's aura appeared within the vicinity, he had been able to sense its exact location. As if they were both connected to one another, closing his eyes, he could sense that it was currently going underground. But as he was sensing the location of the demon, Lu shouts at him to look at something. It turns out that there were an endless amount of warriors going to where they were. The integration demon had been sensed by everyone nearby. Aang could see that the sharper sensed groups had already noticed the battle that went down just now, but he knew that it would still take time for the other warrior groups to accurately pinpoint the elemental core demon's exact location. So Aang decides that he and Lu need to take a shortcut right now. Knowing that time was running out, Aang grabs onto Lu's arm, telling her that they needed to go, much to her surprise. But instead of being gentle with her, Aang simply just drags her without warning down a black hole. As Aang dropped into the hole with Lu in his arms, her constant screaming could be heard. Ignoring her screams, Aang knew that the demon was hiding underneath the castle, so leaping into this hole was the fastest way for them to reach it. He had also gained some insight into how to use his elemental powers, and given their current situation, it was the perfect chance to try out a few new things. As they continued to fall deeper into the hole, tree branches started to appear from the sides. Aang had used his wood elemental power skill called Entangle, to create a bunch of criss-cross patterns. It was a wood-type speed deceleration zone. Smashing through each of the wooden branches, Aang was excited, laughing like a madman while calling this experience amazing. By using the tree branches to slow down their fall, our boy was now sliding across the walls, as if he was skateboarding. While Lu was still screaming out of her mind. After some time, the two of them had finally reached the bottom of the pit, but Lu was the only one that could be seen. So she calls out for Aang, asking him about where he was. Aang slowly speaks out, telling her that he was right below her. He nervously apologizes to Lu for scaring her with the sudden jump, before politely asking her if she could get off of him. Looking at their current positions, Aang being the bottom while Lu was the top. Her face was instantly flushed with embarrassment, and a loud slapping sound followed. After walking for a while with a huge bruise on his head, Aang whispers to Lu that he couldn't believe that there was another sanctuary right beneath the ruins, but she wanted to know how much longer till they reach the demon. As they took a few more steps, Aang said that they were close, and it should be right in front of them. Aang was right as a demon is seen chilling by itself in a room. It's the quintuple-finned integration crystal demon, who is currently sleeping. Looking at it sleeping, they had found the integration crystal demon, but Lu wanted Aang to be sure that it was the demon they wanted, because to her, it looked like any other quintuple-finned demon, the only difference was the amount of aura it was giving out. Aang confirms it and starts to plan their attack. He informs Lu that once the battle begins, the noise will definitely attract all kinds of teams here. So they needed to kill this demon before the others could get there, so their goal was to take the integration core out from the quintuple-finned demon's chest and leave this place immediately. Aang needed Lu's help, as he guessed it would only take them around 5 minutes to finish this fight. Lu was taken aback by Aang's suggestion that it would only take 5 minutes for them to take down a quintuple-finned elemental demon, but with Aang here with her, she was confident, only asking him about what he needed her to do. So the two of them began to discuss the plan to take down the quintuple-finned demon in under 5 minutes. But Lu was shocked by Aang's suggestion of an advanced level technique, making her wonder where he had gotten all of this experience from, as she had never heard of any of these energy methods that he had mentioned. Right now, Aang couldn't reveal much to Lu, so he tells her to believe in herself as he knew that she could do it. So the plan begins with Aang rushing towards the quintuple-finned demon first. As he approaches the demon, it finally awakens from its slumber, having sensed a warrior nearby. Aang was going in full force mode as he activated his demonic energy from the start, After looking closer, he knew that there were definitely quite a lot of strong warriors in this castle with powerful senses. So if he doesn't get this demon quickly, then those strong teams will soon flood this place, making it even harder for him to obtain the integration crystal. Seeing Aang coming, the demon was impressed by him to find its hiding spot quickly, so it waits for Aang, with fire and water in each of its clawed hands. But looking at Aang's current form, the demon believed that what it thought about him was right. Sensing Aang's aura, it could feel that he was a demon too. So the demon launches the skill called Dance of the Fire Current. A combination attack mixed with the water and fire elemental powers together. Aang looks at the new skill, analyzing it. He could see that if one manages to maintain the proper harmony between various elements, then it would allow him to use multiple elemental energies together. Deciding to give it a good, Aang copies the quintuple finned demon's skill, having water and fire elemental powers in his own hands as well. In an instant, he was able to copy the demon's skill, Dance of the Fire Current, resulting in the demon's attack being countered by itself. As Aang and the quintuple finned demon fought one another, Lu was hiding her presence and protecting herself with her green shield. Recalling back to when Aang was explaining the plan, he tells her to not be afraid of the abilities and external appearance that he will have later on, and to just consider them as his own unique skills. What's most important was to know that the person there was him, Aang. After recalling that memory, Lu couldn't help but take a look at Aang's unique ability, which changes his form and aura to be almost exactly like a demon. The fight between Aang's and the demon's skills soon ended with a huge impact, sending both of them far apart from one another. The demon was confused by how Aang was able to use and understand its techniques by just looking at them. I guess Aang has the Sharingan this time. The demon was even more confused by how Aang was able to use both water and fire elements too. But our boy appears right behind the demon this time, telling it that he could use more than 2 of the elements. Before he could grab onto the demon, it transforms into water, narrowly escaping from Aang's clutch. But it wasn't able to escape from Aang unharmed as pieces of its head were gone, forcing the demon to use its wood element to heal itself. The demon realized that Aang had used the metal element this time, which caused its head injury. Aang had used his metal skill called Fortification to create golden claws, allowing him to harm the demon, but he was testing the demon, and found that it was as he expected. The demon was able to use the wood element to heal its wounds. Now that he had learned about all of its abilities, Aang decided that it was time to wrap this chapter up. The demon, sensing death, wanted to escape but couldn't move at all. It looks down at its leg, realizing that Aang was able to use the wood element too as a tree branch appeared from below its feet, and held it in place. Testing out a new skill again, Aang had recalled this move from back at the demon hunting competition. He had copied the quadruple fiend demon who uses the metal element, allowing him to use the skill called Serrated Edge Hand Scythe. Instead of running away, the quintuple finned demon wanted to compare which element was stronger. The demon had decided to challenge Aang's skill with a skill of its own. It had decided to use all of its metal elemental energy, calling forth a golden shield using the skill called Triple-Headed Knife Shield. Seeing the demon use its final energy for this skill, Aang laughs as it had fallen according to his plan. He immediately shouts for Lu to do it now, causing the demon to turn around in shock. It's time for death as Lu appears right behind it, holding onto a massive spear made out of green energy in her hands. She recalls Aang's lecture of the advanced energy technique, which is to try and group all of the energy in her crystal together and to feel it. Gather the energy, picture the flow, and structure it in her heart. Give that energy a shape, allowing you to create a weapon out of thin air. And to finally wield that new power as her own power.
Thanks for watching the latest part from the voice of Manhwa. Subscribe for more content and don't forget to comment below what you want to see in the future. Like and share for more.